Hi there and welcome back. Hope you're doing well. Coach Daniel here with a very special episode. It's a very unique episode, this one, because we have a method developed by someone who has, tuned into the channel, the teaching, and was either my client or Alina's client in BedTyme. I'm not sure, but she is actually a CBT therapist and wants to share something that I think can be really valuable. So, without further ado, let's actually look into an email I got a few days ago, and then look at this method that Stephanie has developed. So let's just take a look at it. And before that, actually, very quick announcements. Tomorrow, Neil is guesting open class. I think that'll be a really valuable one. And I also want to share that in my book, How to Become a Sleep Coach. It's actually longer than that, the title, but it's going to be How to Become a Boundless, Life-Changing, Soul-Saving, NATO Rebel Sleep Coach is almost finished. And by the way, as always, anyone who wants some more support than you find here on the channel, head over to our website and you can find some ways to work with myself or somebody else. But yeah, with that said, I want to jump in here and let's read this. I got this email just a few days ago. Hi, Daniel. Hope you're doing well. Appreciate you taking any time to read this, given how busy you must be! Exclamation mark. I have struggled with insomnia for about 10 years. I've followed your podcast and channel and read your books over the past few months. It brings tears to my eyes to think about how much I've learned and my gratitude towards the resources you provide. Your work has really changed my life. It's amazing to read this, really, especially given that, just, maybe a year and a half ago, this channel was really all about, it was kind of like kind of discovering things in the dark, figuring things out. And when I see a message like this, I see like this is really meaningful. Thanks to the community, thanks for all the interactions, like this email. Anyway, just went on a little side note there. I'm a clinical psychologist who practices CBT. In my personal work with sleep, I just completed a method that combines some of your teachings with the work I do with patients. I thought I would share it with you to let you know how much you're helping, but also in case you thought others might benefit from the method. Essentially, the method gets at reluctance, resistance to change rules we might have for ourselves. Through your resources, I discovered I believed the rule: if I get 6 to 8 hours of sleep, I will have a great day. I will do well in relationships and at work. I completed a cost-benefit analysis of believing that rule versus a new rule I made for myself. All this is attached. I hope this makes sense. Kind of hard to explain. Anyway, I hope it might be helpful to others or you. It was a big aha moment for me in my path towards immunity. Best, Stephanie. Super thankful for this, Stephanie, and anyone out there who has like this kind of aha moment, something that they think would be really helpful, please let me know. I really believe it can help. So let's just jump in and look at this method. And these, what Stephanie calls rules here is, you can look at it as a rule or a thought or an idea as well. Sometimes when we use the word rule, it can lead us to think I have to follow this rule or something like that. But anyway, just a little comment on that. So rule one is, as Stephanie said, if I have 6 to 8 hours of sleep, I will perform well that day at work and relationships. Rule two is, my performance in work and relationships is not significantly dependent on how much I sleep the night before. Okay, so now Stephanie has done this cost benefits kind of analysis here. So looking at the first rule, believing that if you get a certain amount of sleep, you will do well, and looking at the advantage and disadvantage of having this thought or this idea or this rule. So let's look at the advantages. And by the way, I want to say, actually, from like right off the bat, just reading these two rules, just kind of like intuitively, you can almost sense how the rule number two is probably going to be more helpful, right? You can sense that if you think that my performance, how well I do, my life in general is not dependent on how many hours I sleep, that just gives you a sense of that, and it's an easier sense. There's less pressure, and sleep will happen easier if that is the thought. So then you may say, so if that is somehow obvious, why do we have to do this cost benefit analysis and go into all this detail? Well, the thing is that the more you understand why the brain wants to have rule number one, the more you understand at the granular level why this is the case, the easier you can kind of see through what the brain is kind of like, where the brain is confused. You can see the problems by this kind of deep understanding, and the easier change happens, like the easier it can happen. It's like if we didn't have to look at some of the details here, if we could just say like, oh, of course rule 2 is better, I'm going to adapt that, case closed, that would be nice, but that isn't really how things work. Sometimes it does, but I just sort of wanted to share my thoughts on why I think this detailed look at ideas and thoughts is really helpful, the work that Stephanie has done for us. So with that said, let us now look at what Stephanie listed as advantages of believing that if you sleep 6 to 8 hours, you will do well. First one, it gives me a simple equation by which my performance is determined. Generally makes life simpler. We can kind of easily see that if you have like an easy to follow rule. Now things are less complicated. Second one here. When I get 6 to 8 hours of sleep, I may feel happier and more confident, which I will project to people around me and at my work. There are some good highs and a little bit of like the self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, I slept great, then I will do great, etc. We can see that. When I do not sleep well, I do not have to try as hard because the outcome is already determined. Stephanie doesn't sleep much, then it's like, well, if I don't do well at work, of course, that's just natural, less effort. That we can see a benefit there. I have an excuse for when I'm irritable, grumpy towards my family, or do not perform well at work. I was tired. It's not my fault. We can see that one. I might try comfort items to help me sleep well, which can be pretty gratifying. A warm bath, resting in bed, a beer, like, these kind of like self-kindness type of things that come from having this rule and etc. We can see that one. It gives me something to occupy my mind with. I do not have to think of other painful things that are bothering me. This, I think, can be a really big one. Like the mind is kind of preoccupied with problem solving one thing, and then it keeps us sort of safe from looking at other things that perhaps would be helpful to look at. We can see this one. I do not have to build up my skills. I don't have to do continuing educational work, continuous education at work. Do not have to read about how to communicate effectively because sleep is the main driver of these outcomes anyway. So I get more time to relax and do what I want. So if, according to this rule 1, Stephanie wouldn't really need to do much to improve kind of her work because sleep is all that matters anyway, right? You can see the potential advantage of rule number 1 here. Finally, I would have to admit the strategy I've been using to determine my performance is pretty silly, which is a hit to my ego. It's hard to admit that I've been doing this for 10 years. And maybe this would go into somewhere else. I'm not sure, or maybe it's something meant to put it here. But either way, wherever it goes, I think there's a big one. If you've had this rule for 10 years that, of course, sleep is what matters. I need to get this amount of sleep. Then kind of challenging that is almost like questioning. It is questioning what you've been doing for 10 years. And it can feel often like, well, I've invested so much time in this. Like I can't just let go of this rule. So I think it's a very, very important point that Stephanie brings up here. Okay, so now we've seen some of the advantages of believing in rule 1 or following rule 1, if you will. Now let's look at what Stephanie lists as disadvantages. Okay, disadvantage of rule 1. It gives me very little agency over my outcomes. My outcomes are determined by something I cannot control, sleep. I do not put my energy in the right place so that I can live up to the values that are meaningful to me. Very, very big one. A loss of agency, 100%. I have nothing to add. I keep trying to sleep more so I can perform better, which leads me to sleep less. Performance anxiety, absolutely. I end up with a lot of anxiety and hopelessness because things in my life, work, relationships, etc., are not improving because my strategy is to sleep more. I put more pressure on that, which is something I have no real control over. And before we look at rule number 2, there was some things I thought about as I was reading this just before I started recording here, which was that Stephanie lists a lot of advantages with believing in this rule, And in my thought, as I was reading those advantages, I was thinking, you could have, I think almost all those advantages actually without necessarily believing in that rule. So I just want to point that out. It may be obvious to everyone, point that out to anyone who says like, oh, if I sort of abandon that rule, will I not get to be kind to myself and have a beer, have a bath, do nice things, and not feel pressured to do well, even if I had a night where of course you can actually have those advantages still. Believing that rule one is not a requirement to see those advantages. So I just want to make that super clear. But nonetheless, the point here is that we're learning why sort of the mind wants to keep this, right? Wants to keep that rule one. So we looked at that. Now let's go to rule number 2. My performance in work and relationships is not significantly dependent on how much sleep I get the night before. What are some advantages and disadvantages of seeing things this way? Okay, let's actually start with disadvantages. It is hard to break out of rule number 1 after following it for 10 years. It will take a lot of work, repetition, education, and it may take a while. There may be some times of hopelessness in the process. I think this is very clear. This is a very, very valid point. It's not easy. And oftentimes, the initial work you do, the inner work, the understanding, that like looking at the inside, etc., it's quite painful, and that is a disadvantage. There may be some initial pain here that Stephanie is identifying. And next on, I will have to reach out for support, possibly. That's vulnerability. Accepting that that's a disadvantage. 100%. I will have to hold myself more accountable. I will have to face other things that are causing me pain and face more pain in the process. This is sort of goes back to what she talked about before, when the struggle with sleep sort of can keep one busy, so that one can, one doesn't have to deal with other things. And this comes across here again. I'll have to find new ways to fill my mental space besides worrying about sleep. And that can initially seem like, of course you want to do that, but the void can be scary. The void can be scary, 100%. Maybe my sleep anxiety will just be replaced with something new. That exactly, right? That's exactly the void there. What if there's some new obsessional process stepping lists? And finally, I will lose part of my identity as an insomniac, something I talk about sometimes, which is that, having sometimes community, getting support from other people, getting empathy, having something to blame for things, though that can be real. Okay, so now to read kind of like, when I prepare this, this like the advantages of rule number 2, that made me happy. So let's to end this reading this message, or reading this method, on a really nice note here. Let's look at the advantages of seeing things as my life is not dependent on how much I sleep. Let's look at that. Okay, first, Stephanie says less anxiety and hopelessness, right? That's obviously an advantage, right? I stopped chasing something that is not real. Nothing to add. I can finally find some peace and acceptance generally, including surrounding sleep. Maybe I can ask myself some deeper questions I've been avoiding and have more spiritual growth. It will set me up for less suffering in the future. I can face some other mental health issues, real stress or problems in my life, as opposed to wasting my time trying to control my sleep. Less burden for my family and spouse who are watching me struggle in my quest for sleep. Better quality time with them. I put better energy out into the world, in my relationships, my work. Generally, less toxic mess is in and projected out of me. It's liberating to not be trapped by rule 1. I feel like I'm a victim to something I cannot control with rule 1. So let me stop sharing the screen here. There. So as you can tell, I didn't have much to add there, Nan, because looking through all of this, for me, when I read through kind of that last part, it just becomes so obvious, I think, what is the more helpful way to look at things, or rule to follow, at Willie Stephanie's language here. And so I'm actually going to do some of the hardest things of all, which is refrain from adding more commentary. I think Stephanie said it all, particularly with kind of the advantages of the second path here. And I will just say thank you to Stephanie for sharing this, and anyone who has comments, thoughts on this, please leave them in the comment section, and we shall go from there. Have a really nice rest of your day now, and hope to have you back real soon. Until then, stay out of